SUA, I thought my life was ordinary, until the day the world decided I was never meant to be ordinary at all. My name is Ethan Parker, and the last thing I expected was to wake up in a world where everyone knew a story I had never agreed to be part of. Before all of this, I was just a 25-year-old graphic designer living in Seattle, trying to pay my rent, finish my projects, and convince myself that being the background character in my own life was perfectly fine. I designed worlds for other people, but I never imagined I would step into one myself. Then one evening, everything changed. I remember the sound of rain hitting the pavement, the glow of city lights reflecting on the street, and the strange feeling that my entire life was about to turn a page. The next thing I knew, I opened my eyes beneath a ceiling covered in golden patterns and glowing crystals. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I looked around and realized this was not my apartment. This was not my city. This was not my world. A group of strangers in elegant clothing surrounded me, speaking words I somehow understood. They called me Ethan. They said I had arrived at the Imperial Palace of Aurelia, and then they said something that made my heart stop. The Emperor was waiting for me. Emperor Adrian Valemont. Even hearing his name felt impossible because I knew exactly who he was. He was the ruler from the fantasy novel I had read months ago, the cold and powerful emperor destined to fall in love with the heroine, Seraphina Rosewood. I knew the story. I knew the ending. Adrian would meet Seraphina, the chosen woman of prophecy, and together they would save the empire. That was how the story was supposed to go, except I was standing in the middle of it. I was not supposed to exist here. I was not a hero. I was not important. I was just Ethan, a guy who spent most of his time behind a computer screen and apologized whenever someone bumped into him. Yet the moment I entered the throne room, something felt wrong. The emperor who was supposed to look at Seraphina with admiration was looking directly at me. Adrian sat beneath the massive golden throne, his silver hair catching the light, his expression unreadable. Everyone around him lowered their heads in respect, but his attention never left mine. I expected suspicion. I expected questions. Instead, he quietly said, "You finally came." My mind went completely blank. Finally came? I had never met this man before. I did not belong in this world. I was not part of his story. But the way he looked at me was not like I was a stranger. It was like he had been waiting for someone he already knew. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I had not entered this world by accident. Maybe the story I remembered was never the real story at all. I spent my entire life believing I was just a side character. But the moment I entered the Imperial Palace, I realized the story had a secret it never told me. The next morning after I arrived in Aurelia, I was escorted through endless marble halls that looked like they belonged in a movie. Every detail felt impossible. The towering windows, the golden decorations, the guards standing perfectly still, and the quiet whispers following me wherever I went. Everyone looked at me like they were trying to understand a mystery. And honestly, I felt the same way. I kept asking myself the same question. Why me? According to the story I remembered, this world already had its hero and heroine. Seraphina Rosewood was the chosen one, the woman blessed by destiny. She was supposed to meet Emperor Adrian Valemont, become his closest companion, and change the future of the empire. I was never supposed to be here. I was just an unexpected mistake in a story that was already written. Yet somehow, that mistake was now standing beside the most powerful man in the kingdom. Adrian invited me to a private room overlooking the capital city. From there, I could see thousands of lights shining below, making Aurelia look like something from a dream. He stood near the window, silent for a long moment, as if he was searching for the right words. Finally, he asked, "Do you remember me?" I almost laughed because the question sounded impossible. "No, we have never met." Adrian looked away, but there was something in his expression that confused me. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was something much deeper. "That is what I expected you to say." His answer only created more questions. I wanted to know what he meant, but before I could ask, he showed me an ancient painting hidden inside the palace archives. The painting showed a person standing beneath a strange blue light. The face was unclear, but the clothing and appearance felt strangely familiar. I stepped closer, my heart racing. "Who is that?" I asked. Adrian looked at the painting and quietly replied, "Someone who was supposed to return." My thoughts immediately became a storm. Return? I had never been here before. I was not from this world. I was Ethan Parker from Seattle, A person who spent his days designing advertisements and drinking too much coffee while trying to survive ordinary problems. But Adrian spoke as if my arrival had been predicted long ago. Then he revealed something that completely changed how I saw everything. The prophecy of Aurelia did not mention a heroine alone. There was another part hidden for centuries. A person from another world would arrive when the Empire reached its greatest uncertainty. A person who would change the future. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe I could simply find a way home and leave this strange dream behind. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. Because for the first time in my life, I was not invisible. Someone had been waiting for me. And that was the most frightening part. Not because I was afraid of this world, but because I was beginning to wonder if this world had been waiting for me all along. The more I learned about Aurelia, the more I realized that I was not just a visitor in this world. I was a missing piece of a story that everyone thought they understood. After my conversation with Emperor Adrian Valmont, I could not stop thinking about the hidden prophecy. A person from another world. A person who would change the future. It sounded like something from a fantasy movie, not something that could possibly describe me. I still could not accept it. I was Ethan Parker, the guy who used to worry about unfinished design projects and weather. His coffee order was too expensive. I was not someone who belonged in ancient prophecies or royal history. But Aurelia did not seem interested in what I believed. The following days were filled with lessons about this unfamiliar world. I learned about the Empire, the different regions, and the traditions that shaped the kingdom. Every day brought something new, but one thing remained the same. Adrian kept finding reasons to spend time with me. At first, I thought it was because he wanted answers. After all, I was a mystery that appeared out of nowhere. But the more we talked, the more I noticed something different about him. Behind the title, behind the crown, behind the image of the perfect emperor, Adrian seemed incredibly lonely. Everyone around him treated him like a symbol. They bowed to him, respected him, and followed his commands, but very few people spoke to him like a normal person. I did not know how to act around an emperor, so I treated him like someone who simply needed a conversation. Maybe that was why he kept coming back. One afternoon, Adrian took me to the palace gardens. The place was quiet, filled with flowers and trees that looked completely different from anything I had seen before. For the first time since arriving in Aurelia, I felt like I could breathe. Adrian looked at me and asked, "Do you really want to return home?" The question caught me off guard. I expected myself to answer immediately. Of course I wanted to go home. My family, my friends, my entire life were waiting for me. But when I opened my mouth, the answer did not come as quickly as I expected. I looked around at the strange world that had somehow started feeling familiar. "I do not know," I finally admitted. Adrian seemed surprised by my honesty. Then he said something I never expected to hear from him. "Most people come to this palace wanting power, wealth, or recognition. You are the first person who came here wanting nothing." I smiled awkwardly. That is probably because I still cannot believe I am here. For a moment, Adrian smiled too. It was small, almost impossible to notice, but it was real. The emperor who everyone described as distant and untouchable was different when nobody else was watching. And that was when I realized something dangerous. I was starting to understand him, not as a ruler, not as a character from a story, but as a person. Then, just as I thought I was beginning to understand my place in Aurelia, a message arrived at the palace. Serafina Rosewood had returned. The heroine of the original story had finally arrived. The moment I heard her name, my heart sank, because I knew what was supposed to happen next. The story was finally trying to put itself back on its original path. And I was terrified to discover whether Adrian would still look at me the same way when the person everyone had been waiting for finally appeared. The moment Serafina Rosewood arrived at the Imperial Palace, I felt the entire world shift back into place. It was like watching a story correct itself after a mistake. The person everyone had been waiting for was finally here. The chosen heroine. The person who was supposed to stand beside Emperor Adrian Valmont. And I was the unexpected person who was never supposed to exist. I tried to convince myself that this was good news. After all, this was what I wanted, right? I wanted the original story to return to normal. I wanted to find my way home and stop feeling like I was standing in someone else's destiny. But for some reason, the thought of Adrian looking at Serafina the way he looked at me made my chest feel strangely heavy. I hated that feeling, because I knew I had no right to it. Serafina was everything the legends described. She was graceful, intelligent, and kind. The moment she entered the palace, Everyone welcomed her with excitement. The servants whispered about the return of hope. The nobles spoke about the future of Aurelia. Everyone seemed certain that fate had finally arrived. I watched from a distance, waiting for the moment Adrian would recognize her as the person written in the prophecy. But something unexpected happened. Adrian was polite to Serafina, but he was not different. There was no sudden connection, no magical moment, no sign that the story I remembered was coming true. Instead, when Adrian entered the room, his eyes searched through the crowd until they found me. And somehow, that made me even more confused. Later that evening, I asked him directly, "Why are you still looking for me?" Adrian seemed surprised by my question. "Because you are here." "That does not make sense," I replied. "Serafina is the person everyone expected." Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Everyone expected a story. I am trying to understand the truth." Those words stayed with me. Because Adrian was not choosing me because of a prophecy. He was not following some mysterious force. He was simply trying to understand who I was. The next few days became even more confusing. I tried to keep my distance, but Adrian continued inviting me to join him during his daily routines. We walked through the palace gardens. We discussed books from my world. I explained simple things from modern life that fascinated him, like smartphones and airplanes. For the first time, I saw him laugh without worrying about how others viewed him. And for the first time, I forgot that he was an emperor. He was just Adrian, a person who had spent years carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. But then I discovered something that changed everything. While exploring the palace library, I found records about the prophecy. The pages described the arrival of another world traveler, but the name had been removed. Someone had deliberately erased the truth. The more I read, the clearer it became. I was not a mistake in this story. I was a missing chapter. And if someone had hidden that chapter for centuries, there was a reason. I closed the ancient book and looked toward the palace windows. Somewhere beyond those walls, the answers were waiting. But I also knew one thing. The moment I discovered why I was brought to Aurelia, everything between Adrian and me could change forever. The truth hidden inside the ancient records changed everything I thought I knew about Aurelia. For days, I could not stop thinking about the missing name in the prophecy. Someone had removed a person from history, erased a part of the story, and somehow that missing piece was me. I returned to the palace library the next morning, hoping I had misunderstood what I found. Maybe I was searching for answers where there were none. Maybe I wanted to believe I mattered because I was tired of feeling like a stranger in this world. But the deeper I looked, the more impossible it became to deny. The old records described a traveler from another world who would arrive when the empire needed a new path. The traveler was not meant to save Aurelia through strength or power. The traveler was meant to change the heart of the person who carried the crown. I read the words again and again. Change the heart of the emperor. My first thought was that it had to be someone else. Anyone else. I did not understand politics. I did not understand magic. I did not even understand how I ended up here. How could someone like me affect the future of an entire empire? When I left the library, I found Adrian waiting outside. He did not look surprised to see me. In fact, he looked like he already knew what I had discovered. "You found it," he said quietly. I stopped walking. "You knew about this?" Adrian looked toward the palace gardens before answering. I knew there was a missing part of the prophecy. I did not know who the person would be. His honesty surprised me. I expected an emperor to have every answer. Instead, Adrian admitted that there were things even he did not understand. That was when I realized something important. Adrian was not just the ruler of Aurelia. He was someone who had been searching for answers too. We sat together in the gardens, and for the first time, he told me about his past. He spoke about growing up inside the palace, surrounded by people who saw him as the future emperor before they ever saw him as a person. Every decision he made affected thousands of lives. Every mistake became something others remembered forever. Sometimes, Adrian said, looking at the flowers around us, I wondered if anyone would ever know who I was without the title. I understood that feeling more than I expected. In my world, I had always felt unnoticed. Here, Adrian was surrounded by attention, but still felt alone. Two people from completely different worlds, yet somehow carrying the same loneliness. Before I could answer, a royal messenger arrived with urgent news. The council had requested a meeting. They had learned about the hidden prophecy, and they wanted answers. They wanted to know who I was, why I had appeared, and why the emperor was spending so much time with someone who was not part of their plans. As I followed Adrian toward the council chamber, I felt the weight of every step. I came to Aurelia believing I was an accident, but now I was beginning to understand something. The greatest danger was not that I had changed the story. The greatest danger was that the story had been waiting for me to arrive all along. The moment I stepped into the council chamber, I realized that being part of a prophecy sounded much easier in a book than in real life. The room was enormous, with tall windows overlooking the capital of Aurelia and a long table surrounded by the Empire's most influential leaders. Everyone looked at me with the same question written across their faces. Who is this person, and why is the Emperor treating him like he matters? I wanted to disappear. I was Ethan Parker, not a royal advisor, not a chosen hero, and definitely not someone prepared to stand in front of an entire council. Adrian stood beside me, calm and composed as always. But I noticed something different. He was not standing there as a distant emperor. He was standing there like someone making a decision. The council asked questions about my arrival, my origins, and the hidden prophecy. They wanted to understand why the ancient records mentioned someone from another world. I answered honestly. I told them I did not know why I was here. I did not know how to return home. I did not even know why the prophecy had chosen me. For the first time since arriving in Aurelia, I admitted the truth out loud. I am just trying to understand what happened to me. The room became quiet. I expected doubt. I expected criticism. Instead, Adrian spoke before anyone else could respond. That is exactly why he is different. Everyone looked at him. Adrian explained that the prophecy was never about someone who wanted power. It was about someone who had no desire to control the future, someone who simply wanted to find their place. His words surprised me because they sounded like he understood me better than I understood myself. After the meeting ended, Adrian and I walked through the palace corridors in silence. I could tell something was on his mind. Finally, he stopped near the old archives and said, "There is something I have never told anyone." I looked at him carefully. Adrian revealed that long before I arrived in Aurelia, he had been seeing the same person in his dreams. A stranger from another world. Someone standing beneath a strange blue light. Someone whose face he could never clearly remember. My heart started beating faster. "You are saying you dreamed about me?" I asked. Adrian nodded. "Not exactly you as you are now, but the feeling was always the same. I knew someone was coming." I did not know what to say. The idea that Adrian had been connected to my arrival before we ever met felt impossible. Yet somehow, it explained why he looked at me like I was not a stranger. It explained why he said I had finally come. For the first time, I wondered if my journey to Aurelia had started long before the night everything changed in Seattle. Maybe the moment I opened my eyes in this world was not the beginning. Maybe it was the moment when two paths that had been separated for years finally crossed. But before I could ask more questions, Adrian looked toward the distant horizon and said something that made me realize the truth was even bigger than I imagined. "Ethan, there is a reason your name was removed from the prophecy." And that was when I understood. Someone had not forgotten me. Someone had tried to hide me. The truth behind my missing name was not just a secret. It was a warning. After Adrian told me that someone had erased me from the prophecy, I could not stop thinking about one question. Why would anyone hide the existence of someone who had not even arrived yet? The answer was somewhere inside the ancient archives, and Adrian was determined to find it with me. For the first time since coming to Aurelia, I stopped feeling like I was searching for a way back home. Instead, I was searching for the reason I had been brought here. Adrian and I spent hours studying old records, forgotten journals, and faded maps of the Empire. The more we discovered, the stranger everything became. The original prophecy was not about a hero and a heroine saving Aurelia together. It was about a choice that would decide whether the Empire continued following an old path or created a completely new future. And somehow, that choice was connected to Adrian. One evening, while we were reading in the library, I noticed Adrian staring at an old symbol carved into the pages of a forgotten book. His expression changed, just for a moment. The calm emperor disappeared, and I saw someone who looked genuinely surprised. "What is it?" I asked. Adrian slowly touched the symbol. "I have seen this before." He explained that the same mark had appeared in his dreams for years. The same blue light. The same feeling that someone important was waiting somewhere beyond his world. But there was something else. A memory he had never understood until now. "In those dreams," Adrian said quietly, "I heard a voice telling me that one day I would meet someone who would remind me that I was more than a crown. I did not know how to respond. Because somehow, those words felt familiar. Not because I remembered the dream, but because I understood what it meant to feel like nobody truly saw you. Adrian was an emperor surrounded by people, yet he had spent years feeling alone. I was an ordinary person surrounded by millions of people, yet I often felt invisible. Maybe that was why we understood each other. But our discoveries did not go unnoticed. The council began questioning Adrian's decisions. They believed the prophecy should follow the original interpretation, the one that placed Seraphina at the center of Aurelia's future. They respected her abilities and believed she was important, but they could not understand why the emperor was changing his attention towards someone who appeared from another world. I worried that I had become a problem for Adrian. I told him maybe I should leave the palace. Maybe I should stop interfering with a story that belonged to this world. Adrian looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen before. Ethan, you keep saying you are changing my story, but you never ask if my story was already wrong. His words stayed with me, because maybe I was not the person who had entered the wrong world. Maybe this world was the one that had been waiting for the wrong story to end. And as I looked at Adrian, I realized the greatest change was not happening around me. It was happening between us. The moment I realized Adrian was willing to challenge the future written for him, I understood that my arrival in Aurelia was no longer a simple mystery. It was a turning point, but knowing that did not make things easier. In fact, it made everything more complicated. I spent the next few days trying to understand what my place was in this world. I was surrounded by people who believed destiny had a clear plan, while I was still struggling to understand why I was part of that plan at all. Seraphina noticed my confusion before anyone else did. One afternoon, she found me sitting alone in the palace gardens, staring at the city below. I expected her to be angry. After all, according to the story I remembered, she was supposed to be the person standing beside Adrian. Instead, she simply sat beside me and said, "You look like someone who is trying to disappear." Her words caught me off guard because they were exactly what I had been feeling. I admitted that I never wanted to take anyone's place. I never wanted to change her story or interfere with Aurelia's future. Seraphina listened quietly before smiling. "Maybe that is why the prophecy chose you." I looked at her, confused. She explained that everyone expected the chosen person to arrive with confidence and certainty. Someone who already knew they were important. But I arrived with questions. I arrived afraid of making mistakes. I arrived wanting to help, not wanting to be celebrated. Meanwhile, Adrian faced increasing pressure from the council. They wanted him to follow tradition. They wanted him to accept the future everyone had already decided for him. But Adrian refused to pretend that destiny was more important than truth. When I asked him why he was willing to risk everything, he gave me an answer I never expected. Because for the first time in years, I know what my own choice feels like. Those words stayed with me. Adrian had spent his entire life carrying expectations placed on him by others. The crown, the prophecy, the responsibilities of an empire. Everyone knew what they wanted him to become, but almost nobody asked who he wanted to be. And somehow, I was the person who reminded him of that question. Then came the final discovery. Hidden behind a sealed section of the archives was the original version of the prophecy. The words were different from what the empire had been taught. The prophecy never said that a heroine would save Aurelia. It said that the emperor would meet someone who would help him choose his own path. The missing name was removed because the truth changed everything. The prophecy was never about finding the perfect person. It was about finding the person who could change the emperor's heart. I stood there holding the ancient pages, unable to speak. For so long, I believed I was an accident, a mistake that appeared in someone else's story. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was not here to replace anyone. Maybe I was here because the story was incomplete without me. And as Adrian looked at me across the quiet archive, I realized something that scared me more than any mystery. I was no longer searching for a way back to my old life. I was starting to wonder if Aurelia had become my new home. For the first time since arriving in Aurelia, I stopped wondering whether I belonged here. I finally understood that some journeys do not begin when we choose them. They begin when we are ready to become someone new. The days that followed the discovery of the true prophecy changed everything. The empire still had questions, but the fear and uncertainty that once surrounded me slowly began to disappear. People who once saw me as a stranger started seeing me as someone who had a place in Aurelia. Not because of a prophecy, not because of some mysterious power, but because I had chosen to stay and understand this world. Adrian changed too. The emperor who once carried every responsibility alone finally allowed himself to share those burdens. He still had the same calm expression, the same royal presence, and the same ability to make an entire room become silent with just one look. But now I knew the person behind the title. I knew the man who loved old books, who enjoyed quiet gardens, and who secretly smiled whenever he discovered something new about my world. One evening, we stood on the balcony overlooking the capital. The lights below looked almost like the city of Seattle that I once called home. For a moment, I felt the distance between my two worlds. I thought about the life I left behind. My apartment, my old routines, the ordinary days I once believed were everything I would ever have. I expected to feel only sadness. Instead, I felt grateful. Because the person I was before arriving in Aurelia would never have believed that he could matter this much. Adrian looked at me and asked, "If you had the choice, would you return?" It was the question I had avoided since the beginning. A part of me still missed my old life. That would never disappear. But another part of me had changed forever. I looked at the empire around us, the place that had once felt impossible and unfamiliar. Then I looked at Adrian. "I think I would always remember where I came from," I said. "But I do not think I would want to forget where I am now." Adrian smiled softly. It was not the smile of an emperor. It was the smile of Adrian, the person I had come to know. The next morning, Aurelia officially recognized the truth of the prophecy. Not as a story about a chosen hero or a perfect destiny, but as a reminder that the future could change through unexpected choices. Serafina continued her own journey, creating a path that belonged only to her. She was never replaced. She was never forgotten. Everyone in Aurelia discovered that a story could have more than one person who mattered. As for me, I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had fallen into the wrong world. I was not a mistake. I was not a missing piece that needed to be hidden. I was Ethan Parker, someone who found a new beginning in a place he never expected to see. And beside me was Adrian Valmont, the emperor who taught me that destiny was not something written in stone. Sometimes, destiny was simply the person who chose to stand beside you when everything else changed.